Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Divya Gandhi, an environmental journalist with Frontline. I welcome you to an important edition of Frontline Conversations. We have with us today the environmental researcher and author Pankaj Seksaria, as well as the investigative and environmental journalist and author M. Rajshekhar. They have both spent considerable amounts of time studying the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and today they will break down for us the repercussions of a hugely costly infrastructure project that has been proposed in the fragile Great Nicobar Island, which lies at the southernmost tip of the island chain. The 81,000 crore project, ironically titled The Holistic Development of Great Nicobar Island, includes a transshipment port at the Galathea Bay where endangered leatherback turtles and a flightless bird called the Nicobar megapode nest. Millions of trees are proposed to be felled in these rainforests, and the 900 square kilometer island, home to two tribal communities, the Nicobaris and the Shompen, is being prepared to welcome a legion of tourists for whom an international airport, casinos, a power plant, and a greenfield township are to be built. Pankaj, I will start with you. Now, the government's idea is to turn Nicobar into Singapore. What are your chief concerns about the idea? And can you also tell us about some of the discrepancies, the fallacies, and the about turns that the project report itself has seen?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Divya, and thanks a lot to Frontline for putting this together. And of course, we are speaking in the context of the new issue, the recent issue of Frontline with the cover story on Great Nicobar, a fragile future. So, actually, if one looks at this project like we've been doing now for the last 4 or 5 years, on almost every axis, one finds that there are problems, Divya. There is the ecological issue, where you mentioned the Nicobari megapode and the giant leatherback turtle, but there are hundreds of species that are found in this uh, very pristine, untouched rainforest, this very interesting coastline, and then of course the marine dimension of it. These rather untouched, pristine marine systems where we have all kinds of animals, coral reefs, coral systems, marine mammals, a lot of which is not known, a lot of which is not documented. So there is the concern on the ecological dimension. There is the concern which perhaps has not got the attention that it deserves, which is of the geological dimension. So we've been discussing this and we've been writing about it, and it is known that this island chain is located on a very, very active seismic fault. It's a very volatile location. This is pretty much the the center of where the earthquake and tsunami of 2004 happened. We know it happened off the coast of Banda Aceh, which is literally stone's throw from Great Nicobar, where this project is coming up. The island saw a very substantial shift in its layout. Great Nicobar saw a subsidence of land. Uh, Almost 15 feet of the Nicobar Island saw subsidence. The lighthouse, the famous lighthouse at Indira Point, which is the southernmost tip, stood above the high tide line in an area that was surrounded by forest. Today it stands surrounded by the waters of the Andaman Sea. So, what is the implication in terms of the cost to the infrastructure that will be built, uh, to the 300,000 people that will be brought in as part of the project proposal to work in this particular island? So, that's a very, very big area of concern. There is the economics of the whole thing, and I think Rajshekhar is best suited to speak about that, and he will be talking to us. I think the recent report he's done based on his 2 weeks of work, uh, I think for the first time goes into some of the specifics and asks questions that have not really been asked, and I think that's a very important dimension that has not been considered so far. So there is this process, the issue of the economics. There is of course the very, very critical issue you mentioned of the indigenous people, the two communities, the Nicobaris and the Shompen, who have been here for thousands of years, who have special provisions under law, who are uh, who are protected by the Indian Constitution, and whose rights are going to be very severely violated. I mean, uh, almost 20% of their island home, which they've been living here, have been surviving on, is sought to be taken away. So I think culturally, physically, they're going to be decimated. And finally, in this round, I'd just like to say that the following of due process where environmental clearances are concerned, where the Tribal Rights Act, and there is now a discussion in the Calcutta High Court, there's a petition there, that on paper, the project proponents and the administration is saying that due process has been followed. So environmental clearance has been granted, a forest clearance has been granted at the stage one forest clearance. But if one looks at the specifics of how that has been done, it raises very, very many questions. So I'll just make this one point. The project proposal first came up in March of 2021. Within 15 months, this project was granted environmental clearance. In November of 2022, 15 or maybe 18 months, a project of this magnitude, 80,000 crores, like you mentioned, 130, 160 square kilometers of pristine land, home to two tribal communities. This is not an easy landscape to work, a tectonically very active and volatile landscape. So, just the scale of what would have to be understood, what would have to be studied, what would have to be accounted for ecologically, also in terms of the rights of the tribal people, geologically. Is it really going to be possible to do that in 15 months? And evidence of why that can't happen is in the text of the EIA report, which was finally approved. And there's some atrocious language, and scientists have also argued, saying that there's data that's incorrect. There are parts of the report that are plagiarized, and it's clearly very, very shoddy work, to use a very mild term. So while we might say the clearances have come, if you go into just scrape the surface, you will realize that it's been done to tick the box off. And 15 months to study, evaluate, and then grant clearance, or 16 months, 17 months, is simply not enough. It does not do justice. So there are many other points, and I'll probably come back. You asked about what the key concerns are. So, across ecological, tribal issues, environmental issues, law, due process, everything that you can put in the basket is actually there. And we can elaborate a little bit more as we go along.
A long time back, when I was in Economic Times, I was talking to the this really senior editor called Shankar Raguraman, and Shankar was talking about the importance of being able to evaluate anything that we write on from first principles. Okay, so the government will come out with a bunch of its own claims and feasibility reports and so on, and it's often very useful to be able to um, build our own case or our own critique of the project, starting from, like Shankar said, first principles. So, what are first principles in this case? I'll start with the economic question. We are being told that the project is initially 72,000 crores and then 81,000 crores, right? Um, of this, the port is going to account for something like 37,000 crore rupees, of which the first phase is 18,000 crore rupees. Um, this is where the numbers themselves stop adding up. Uh, if you, as you know, if you assume that the port is going to cost the phase one, which is, if you assume that phase one is indeed going to cost 18,000 crores, as the government says, and given that this 18,000 crores will be sort of money raised by the either probably by the government at a subsidized rate of interest and 9%. Uh, that means that the annual interest payment you have to make on a project of this kind is going to be around 2,100 crores on 18,000 crores. Uh, the project says that in phase one, the port will be capable of transshipping 4 million containers every year. Uh, it's a slightly tenuous sort of a claim to make because India is setting up a bunch of other transshipment ports simultaneously, all seeking to take business of Colombo. Colombo's capacity is about 6 million containers. And so between Viringam, Vallarpadam, maybe Kolachel, and GNI, it's really not very clear that GNI is going to hit that 4 million container mark. But even if you assume that it does 4 million containers a year, uh, And if you additionally assume that GNI is charging the same rate as Colombo, it obviously cannot charge more. If it charges more, container ships won't come. So if you do this very basic arithmetic, right? 4 million containers, each container charging the same as Colombo, which is $35, that leaves you with a gross revenue or total revenue of 1,000 crores a year, right? This is not enough to pay for the port. And this is where the problems start to really compound. When I first heard about this port 2 years ago, it was from somebody who had been a part of the expert appraisal committee. That person lives in Bangalore and he wanted to sort of meet and share his concerns. Um, and I met him and I came back relatively horrified because it's not often in this day and age that you have a project which is blithely proposing to log 1 million trees, right? Um, so I parked that conversation, thinking that this is something I have to work on in the future. And then when I was in Bombay, some months later, I had gone and met a maritime industry consultant. And that person had something really interesting to say. He said that, look, if you look at what the government is saying and what the DPRs are saying, there's a prima facie case to say that the port is viable. It will indeed reduce shipping time uh, for vessels which are otherwise going all the way to Colombo or all the way to Singapore. A large vessel can simply drop the containers at Great Nicobar, and ships from Chennai or Calcutta or Dhaka can sail 500 nautical miles less, pick up the containers from here, and go back home. On that limited point, the project is viable. The problem comes in at another level, which is that a standalone port will not be competitive. It will need a city around it to provide all the services that a shipping firm will need, which means that, like Singapore, we will need to um, have ship repair facilities, have houses for staff, have an airport, houses for airport staff, schools, hospitals, um office spaces for customs people, the works, right? And the catch is that unlike a Singapore, which has multiple economic engines which are running the entire port city complex, or unlike uh, Gandhidham, Gujarat, which has again multiple economic engines which are sort of supporting the city, apart from the towns of Kandla and Mundra. On Great Nicobar, you will only have one economic engine, and that engine is going to be the port. So, effectively, what you're saying is that the revenues from the port have to support not only the port, but also support the rest of the city, which is to say that the revenue you make, assuming you get your 4 million containers a year, it has to go into repaying the loans that the government picks up for that 81,000 crores of the project, which adds up to something like 9,000 crores a year. And therefore, on this primary point, the project has real questions about its economic feasibility. The government is talking about creating alternate revenue streams, therefore, for the city complex, but there are problems with each of those. I went to Port Blair while reporting on this story, and in my first week in Port Blair, uh, I spoke to a bunch of civil contractors uh, in Blair, right? And what they said is that the cost of constructing anything on Port in the archipelago is 2.5 to 3 times the cost on the mainland, because everything, raw material, everything has to be shipped across. And therefore, when you decide to build, let's say, anything on the hotel, on Great Nicobar, right? Whether it's a hotel or um, a port or a ship repair yard or a cruise terminal or anything or a casino, everything will cost you 2.5 to 3x the price it will on the mainland, which means that everything will be proportionately costly. And therefore, the question becomes that if I wanted to have a vacation, would I go to Great Nicobar or would I go to Thailand? Right. So when the government says that yes, we have the port and we have a second economic engine of tourism, um, and therefore we are building an airport with a capacity for 2 million passengers at a time when all of Andaman and Nicobar gets 5 lakh passengers. The question of viability kicks in there too, right? And here come a couple of larger numbers, which is to say that uh, as we see with the port in Viringam, uh, the state government and the central government are extending viability gap funding because they don't to sort of help the project proponent or the concessionaire not make losses while running it. In the case of Great Nicobar, the project, when proposed first by Prime Minister Modi in 2020, project cost was pegged at 10,000 crores. Then it became 72,000 crores by 2022, 81,000 crores by 2024, and that is only talking about the capital expenditure that you make. Once you start adding uh, the interest payments that the government will have to make and the viability gap funding that the government will have to give, this project is going to swell. It's going to double, treble in size. We don't really know. The question is, what are the economic benefits you're getting in return for uh, A, the financial investments you're making, and B, the ecological and social costs that you're sort of dumping onto this island, right? There is this subplot in all this, which is saying that, this is very, very important from a national security point of view. And that point is taken given the location of the island, even though it's also being argued that beefing up Port Blair or Nicobar is a better strategy right now. Uh, but even if it is a national security question to sort of build something on this island, am so far, like many of the people I spoke to, unable to understand why it has to be bundled with a transshipment port, a airport with a capacity for 2 million passengers, the works. As it is a key linchpin of this plan to attract tourists is casinos. So I'm not very sure how anybody would feel about having a top secret defense establishment surrounded by casinos. Right. Then you're sort of talking about all manner of illicit money coming along with it. Right. So, I mean, this is what I sort of wrote in the report that was published in Caravan, essentially saying that I think the interesting question here is not that the project's economics are dubious. The interesting question here is that we are persevering with the project even though its economic calculations are dubious. Okay, and this is something that needs to be understood. I was talking to people in the infrastructure sector, and they were saying that this is the general arc of most infrastructure projects, where you create a very very ambitious, grand vision which is going to override local misgivings and get public to sort of buy into the notion of transformative change. What happens thereafter, however, is that only the viable parts of the project end up getting built because at some point, giving statutory clearances is simple. Fundraising for the project is harder, especially in the age of ESG and so on and so forth. I mean, especially when you're talking about cutting conservatively a million trees, right? uh, what is likely is that only the economically viable parts of this project will come to fruition, which in this case means two things. One, logging will continue whether or not the port is built. Two, the people who are bidding for the port project will build for constructing the port, not for running it. So it's a EPC scam. It's a basically EPC opportunity, right? Um, it sort of makes me think. I went to Great Nicobar while working on this story. I wanted to see an island which had not been touched by modernity, right? Just as it comes onto this cusp of becoming a resource frontier. Um, I think that is my apprehension that we are repeating a story that we have seen in the past. Arunachal, for example, 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago, was telling its people that, we are about to build a lot of dams and it's going to transform the state. We will be floating on hydro dollars. What you got, however, was a speculative boom where a lot of rents were exchanged. There was some environmental damage. Very little was built. My fear, and this is again the same story of Tista 3 and so on and so forth, or the thermal power plant boom. My fear is that we will see something similar here, where um, a lot of tenders will be given out, rents will be extracted, logging will be done, but ultimately, the only people to gain will be the speculators. And the costs of it will fall on the extremely rare endemic biodiversity and the local communities. And then we'll get into local communities and biodiversity in a little more detail later on in this conversation, because the government's plans for mitigation of these impacts on both biota and people are downright bizarre.
Rajshekhar, this is kind of related to what you've already said, but I want to go ahead and ask this anyway. The government has justified the 41,000 crore transshipment port uh, on the grounds that it will save crores of rupees in shipping costs. And the second justification is that the port will have geopolitical significance. How do you respond to that rationale?
I think on the first question of the amount of money we save, uh, you know, there's a particular sort of a weird loopholes with projects like this. Uh, there is an evaluation of the environmental impacts of a project, right? No matter how weakly it is done. Uh, Notionally, you would think that the MOEF, the expert appraisal committee, etc., would be sitting and ruling and evaluating the environmental impact assessment report built by the consultants, right? When it comes to these economic numbers, right? The economic feasibility reports, the detailed project reports, we actually don't have any scrutiny, which is how, when you look at this project, what you find is that there is a feasibility report for the port in isolation, which incidentally says that the port is likely to be, that for the port to be profitable, it will need sizable government support, which is like saying that the government should build the port and give it to a concessionaire to run it, in which case it's a viable investment for the concessionaire, right? Um, you don't have a similar viability plan for the city, and you haven't studied the economic viability of the port city complex. Is this conglomeration of port, city, airport, power project, all of it together, what do its combined economics look like? We don't have an answer to that question at all, right? Uh, you sort of read that ACOM feasibility report, and you're left marveling at how precarious the financing of this thing is, and how quickly this can, how probable it is that this project will become a white elephant. Okay, so when the government, so the government has been making one particular statement that we are going to save something like $200 million a year on shipping costs, right? The question is, who is saving that money on shipping costs, right? Is it the shipping companies which are sort of taking the vessels from Singapore and bringing it back to Calcutta and Chennai and elsewhere? Uh, what about the amount of money the government is putting into the project? At the same time, like research will tell you, uh, ports stress a lot on the attractiveness of their location. Shipping lines look at port efficiency and the conglomeration of services that you're able to provide them at the port itself, which means that um, the Indian government really will have to front load its investment of about 60,000 crores before the first of the ships is going to come and dock. On 60,000 crores, given that the private sector will not be willing to put its money into a project like this, which is carrying ESG risks, which is carrying geological risks and viability risks, the government will have to put in that 60K through banks or wherever, and it's very very unclear where they get the money back from. So this is the question that another friend was asking, that the government will put in all this money, some shipping lines will make a profit, but exactly what is the government getting out of it apart from ending up with a white elephant on its books, uh, which sort of makes you then think again that this is essentially one more chapter in this very depressing little book on the political economy of India's infrastructure projects, where firms make their money in the process of construction itself, not by running a project. Okay. Um, uh, but that is the economic part of it. The national security dynamic, I mean, this whole thing is that particular bit is a matter of absolute sort of clashing opinions. You have some people saying that the Navy doesn't want it, that the Navy would rather be for Port Blair. Others are saying that Great Nicobar is an excellent location because it's so close to the Malacca Straits. Yet others are saying that building a very large base, a very large base so close to the Malacca Strait will be another strategic vulnerability, right? Um, and so that question of national security is something that we have to look at separately and in a more detailed fashion. Uh, where I think people agree is that um, having 2 million tourists coming to a place which has uh, a, a defense establishment, having casinos around it, is probably going to sort of deepen the vulnerabilities of defense establishment itself. So if you look at, say, Car Nicobar, locals are not allowed to go there very easily, right? And that is how you guard national security establishments. Uh, There is therefore also talk that what you should be doing on Great Nicobar is building a smaller base. Even if you were to build a larger base, the environmental impact would still be way more manageable than building this port city complex for 3 lakh people, uh, 300 plus ships coming in every year, a ship repair yard, uh, the works.
Okay, this is a question to both of you. What has the government's response been to the books and the articles that you've both written that critique the project? For example, the fact that the environment assessment report itself was flawed.
No, so I think the administration, the government has been quite. There's no response really because it is to kind of completely ignore, if I might put it that way. Of course, there is no response, and also things like the right to information. A number of applications under the right to information filed by a number of people have come up against a stone wall to say that this is under strategic interest of the kind we were just discussing. Also, to add that there is no component in this 81,000 crore project except say a small one, the port, the airport, which is a dual purpose airport. The entire other setting of this whole project, the three components, there is no strategic defense dimension to that. The commercial port that Rashekar has spoken in so much detail, the transshipment port is entirely a commercial project. The power plant is there. This is a 130 square kilometer uh, greenfield tourism and township kind of project. So where is this question where you can deny permissions, deny information saying these are strategic or issues of sovereignty? Where on the one hand, like you pointed out, there are tenders floated and all kinds of agencies are interested, are showing they want to construct. Recently, the shipping ministry has actually asked that they want to develop a shipbuilding yard. They want an ex-import permission for Campbell Bay so that they can import raw material and construction material, perhaps from closer places to look for the cost. So, to ensure that the construction material comes cheaper. So, where is the concern actually in that sense? So, uh, it is just being used as a smokescreen to deny information. Where for that component of the airport, perhaps you can use that argument, but when you have a 130 square kilometer land project where, like we've been discussing, maybe 1 million trees to be cut. Some scientists say it could be 3 million. Another bunch of scientists, based on the density of trees in forests like this, they say it could be 10 million trees. Not only does this raises questions on the environmental and forest clearances because the numbers are completely underestimates, but what is the basis of denying even information on the environmental clearances by invoking certain clauses of the Right to Information Act to say that we can't give this information? Otherwise, it has been pretty much been going on. There is this change that's happening. New dimensions get added to the project. Already, we've seen in 3 years the project estimates have gone up by about 20% already in the port and in the overall, from a 72,000 crore project to now an 81,000 crore project. So these changes are, they just seem to be going along as if nothing is going to matter. The matter did go to the NGT, the National Green Tribunal, and in the book that we did with Frontline in the Great Nicobar Betrayal, Norma Alvarez, who's a lawyer and a researcher, writes quite critically, and she says that the NGT went completely beyond its mandate to not look at the environmental concerns and invoke all kinds of other dimensions. So they have been denying any of this. Typically, as happens in the case of administration, there is no response. The only response is that we have taken care of all of these things. It has gone through due process. But like I was saying in the beginning, if you look at some of the specifics of how the due process was done, then it raises a large amount of questions that certainly need answers. But to specifically come back to your question, no, the administration, the government is going ahead as if it's all okay. There is no problem, and I think that raises serious concerns both in due process and what the implications of that will be. Uh, because what happens if there's an earthquake and a disaster of the kind that happened only 20 years ago? This is a landscape that sees one earthquake on an average a week, where land submerged by 15 feet of permanent subsidence, and there is almost nothing about that anywhere. And again, Professor Janki Andharia, who works at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences at the Center for Disaster Studies there, has worked in the islands, has written very extensively, and there are lots of questions about what is the thinking on what will happen, how are we going to look at those concerns. So there seems to be a complete denial of any of the concerns, or as if nothing is going to go wrong. So I was it's very sad, it's very unfortunate, because what we seek to lose, leave alone the economics and stuff like that, are absolutely priceless forests, like Rajshekhar was saying, species of birds and animals and butterflies that don't exist anywhere on this planet, uh, cultures and communities that have been there, very vulnerable communities. So imagine the Shompen, 250 odd individuals who live in these forests as hunter-gatherer communities. Suddenly, you will have 300,000 people. That is the estimated population of the settler community that will come to this island. This is the permanent set of people who will be brought in. These are not the transient tourists that Rashikar is talking about. So there's no chance that these communities will have to survive. So where are the answers to some of these questions? The Ministry of Tribal Affairs, the National Council of Scheduled Tribes, the local tribal welfare department is on record to actually say that they are mandated with care for and the protection of these communities. They're on record to the project proponent saying we'll get the land de-reserved if you want it for the project. So it's a classical example of the fence eating up the crop. So and any questions raised meets with almost complete silence. So there's absolutely no response on part of the powers that be.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, so I'm going to just skip to the next question for Rajshekhar. Uh, just 2 weeks ago, you visited Campbell Bay, a town in the Great Nicobar Island. Could you tell us about what you observed? What is the status of the infrastructure work? Have government surveys begun? And are people there expressing any concerns?
The question that you asked, Pankaj, when we started this whole thing was, why does this project bother him? Right? And it's actually, a really tough question to answer because the outrage is working here at multiple levels. There's at the lowest of these levels is the economic feasibility level, right? Just above that is, let's say, the level of uh, ecological and social costs. Uh, Yet above that is another level, which is about how the administration is behaving. Um, Here, you actually get this dynamic where the government has now, in response to criticism of the project, it is stopping outsiders from visiting the island, right? And I mean, uh, getting a flight ticket to go to Great Nicobar is very, very hard because you will be told that you have to get a permission from the local bureaucracy to visit Campbell Bay, even though it's revenue land, right? Uh, and therefore open to all Indian citizens. And this, I think, is the layer that really sort of angers me because what you're seeing here is one instance of how fundamental rights of Indians are being uh, trampled on. In the case of, say, outsiders going to the island, even if they're not reporters or researchers, but are just tourists, they're not allowed to go right now. And there is no constitutional legal basis for this. It's just an informal ban which has been created by the administration to make sure that there is minimal discussion on this particular project. Right. Now, when we talk about fundamental rights being violated, fundamental rights of the tribals are being violated at an incredible scale. They were pulled out of their traditional villages in 2005, just after the tsunami. For 20 years now, they have not been allowed to go back to those homes. And now those homes are becoming likely sites for hotels, casinos, not to mention this whole township project, right? Um, when you go to the island, I mean, this is one thing which really jumps out as one of the primary aspects of this project to me about how due process can be so summarily brushed aside to make this project happen. You know, Indian citizens visit, um, tribals living on that island way before India became a country are not allowed to go back to their traditional lands. They're coercively kept in one place by denying them development, facilities like schools and government clinics closer to their ancestral villages by clumping them all only in Campbell Bay. Um, by mitigate by sort of creating this really um, ultimately stupid facade of damage mitigation by saying that, oh, you're worried about the champagne, don't worry, we'll take care of them, we'll geofence their reserve, right? Or to say that, oh, you're worried about the leatherbacks, not to worry, we are going to sort of declare a new wildlife sanctuary for them somewhere else, right? Um, or to say that, oh, you're worried about the megaports and not to worry, we're going to create a new sanctuary for them as well. Problem is that the new megaport sanctuary, for example, which has been created, is 1.2 square kilometers in size. The area being affected here is probably um, 40 square kilometers with I don't know how many megaports already living there. Are we saying that we're going to move all of these megaports to one tiny island of 1.2 square kilometers? And is that island large enough to house all of these? And this is without me getting into the concentrated idiocy of the coral transshipment plan, right? There are coral reefs near Galathea Bay. And what the government is saying is, ZSI is saying, uh, that they will basically cut the coral reefs into manageable chunks, carefully transport them to the new location, put them all back together, literally stick them with epoxy, and that is a relocation of a coral reef. On what, again, the question comes that who is approving these? Is any of this scientifically established as a process? Is there any verification or is it just a fig leaf? Right. So you sort of float around in Campbell Bay for some time and you will get questions like this. Uh, by and large, I think what I picked up most was a lot of anger against the administration. Um, I have just filed another report which is talking about how the locals of Great Nicobar, like the locals of Andaman Nicobar itself, whether they're tribals or settlers, they're all struggling economically because the administration's focus now seems more squarely on just pandering to firms coming in from outside and or making life that bit more comfortable for the bureaucrats working in the place. The locals are struggling. I mean, you see that in everything: healthcare provisioning, um, Campbell Bay. It has one primary health center, 6,000 people. They don't have an ultrasound machine. Okay. And if you want medical treatment, then you have to take either a ship and travel 30 hours to Port Blair or take a flight. But if you take a flight, you have to pay 5,000 rupees for it if the seats are available. This is in a part of the country where annual incomes are around 1.5 lakh rupees. Okay, so monthly income will be 11,000, right? You see a very, very poorly responsive administration as far as the islanders are concerned. But you have this huge development project coming in, development in airports, which has marginal utility for the locals too. Um, in that sense, I mean, it's a classic trap where you do underdevelopment for very long, and then you show people the dream of a Singapore or a Hong Kong, and then people, you know, with little else to hope for, end up accepting this vision in the hope that things will improve. But you still also know that even if a big city complex does come up, the locals are not going to be the ones employed. What happened in Havelock, where the locals had to leave that island as the tourism boom began, will play out in Great Nicobar too.
If I might, just a couple of things to, Divya, if I can add a couple of things here. One is to also go back to this issue of the tribal community and this issue of due process. So, under the FRA, the Forest Rights Act, there is a due process to be followed when lands of the tribal communities are handed over. And again, when we talk about due process, is that now there is this certificate available from the concerned local authority that says that the permission on the forest rights had been given, and this matter has actually been now taken to the Calcutta High Court. And it is astonishing that for about almost 15 years after the passing of the act, the concerned institutional framework had not been created in the islands, anywhere in these islands, to to do the process of the settlement of the rights under the Forest Rights Act. So in 2007 or something, then suddenly in 2022, when the project proposal is alive and everything is happening, suddenly the entire mechanism is put in place, and it is within a period of 22 days that a process that has not happened for 1.5 decades, the permissions are granted, and it is said that uh, the rights of the tribal people will not actually be affected. And in the case of the islands, we've spoken of two communities, and particularly in Great Nicobar, the Shompen is a particularly vulnerable tribal group, which has even more protection under various provisions. So on paper, we will say yes, the clearance, the permissions are there, which are themselves problematic because the committees that have been constituted are wrongly constituted. They don't have the people that it should have. It does not have any or does not have enough representatives of the tribal communities themselves. But the claim is that there is no time frame in when the community should be constituted. So we have done the process now. But for 15 years, we never bothered about settling that process. Suddenly, when there was a need for giving that clearance, it only took 22 days. And in three gram panchayats, and we don't even know all the details. We were trying to figure out. They have not the documents don't have the names of the participants in these meetings, etc., etc. So it's a very, very substantial violation of the law. And why I'm also saying this is now when we are raising the questions about concerns with the project, and this also responds to your earlier question. In the court, the administration and the project proponent are saying, "Oh, clearances came in 2021. Why are you raising questions in 2025?" 4 years is a very long time, and it's almost like a fait accompli. But when 15 years could be taken to set up the constitutional provision, that was okay. Now, when 4 years later, so and of course the argument of fait accompli is being made, but it's important to keep in mind, unlike in many other projects, that work has not started on the ground. So this argument that it's too late, that we have already done stuff, is not going to hold, should not hold. And also to keep in mind here that a lot of this process, what I mentioned in the beginning, the clearance that happened in 2021 and 2022, please remember this happened at the height of the COVID pandemic. We were not able to move out. The structures were all, so not allowing for anything. And yet, in the islands, in this very remote place where access is not easy, Rajshekhar has been speaking about how it's difficult to get there physically. Internet connections are not necessarily the best. You went ahead, you did an entire process amidst the peak of the COVID lockdown in a remote place with communities that you have very limited access. They do not know what's going on. And when we now raise questions, it is these things that come into the picture. So that is something that's very, very important to keep in mind. And they're constantly adding components to that. So one of the most recent ones, and in the frontline issue that we brought out, I've written about it and we've noted saying in the latest edition, the latest version, they have said that they called for an expression of interest to log trees, and so to enumerate, to log, and to transport. So we don't know what the number of trees are going to be. So while the permission has been given based on a certain statistic, it obviously seems to be incorrect because we now have an expression of interest for what those numbers are going to be. And one of the provisions in that is uh, there the trees will be cut, the softwoods will be fed into a power plant for power generation. So which is not even in the original proposal. And it's, in a time of today, we are talking of climate change, we're talking of 1 million trees and more, and your solution is to cut down a tree and feed it for power generation. These kinds of absolutely bizarre, crazy ideas, uh, just coming on and on and on. And this is what we really have to kind of question at many levels. Yeah.
So to add to what Pankaj is saying, just look at the sequencing. About 10 days ago, you gave money to WII and SACON saying that go and study the environmental, the biodiversity impacts of the project. Um, Come up with a mitigation plan. And these organizations ask for anywhere between 1 year to 2 years. However, even before the money is given to them, you've already sort of invited expressions of interest from firms which are going to be doing the logging for you, right? This is logically inconsistent, right? First, you sort of figure out if you're building a project which is going to be around for say 60 years, right? Then you do it methodically, right? You figure out what you can do to sort of what part of your environmental damage can be remedied. Once you are clear there, then you move to the next stage, and then you say, "Ki, theek hai, now we'll think of logging in whichever phase and whichever area and so on." What you have here is that the logging bids are invited first. The environmental management part, the restoration, not the restoration, the relocation part comes in as an afterthought. And when you talk to then scientists in these institutions, what they will say is, we are going ahead to the islands, but we truly do not know when logging will start. So we don't know how much time we have to even start figuring out what can be saved, how it can be saved, where can it be taken, right? That is the level of opacity that we are talking about, where forget the people outside who are not getting answers to their questions. The scientific um component of this project itself is in the dark, right? Uh, the operating logic here, I mean, so you have, it's like it's like taking a functioning ecosystem and replacing it with paper protections. What Pankaj was saying earlier, we're definitely checking all the boxes, right? Has a EI study been done? Has a wildlife management plan been prepared? Uh, uh, is there a bid as opposed to opaque system for handing out logging concessions? Yes, all of those are in place. But when you take a closer look, you find that everything is deeply performative and deeply, deeply perfunctory, right? Uh, there is an inexplicable hurry to start building the project despite real concerns about its economics, not to mention environmental viability, and extremely uncertain arguments even on the national security front, because you could just build a standalone defense establishment and be done with it, right? I think this question on why there is such a hurry to build the port, and attached to this, If this is a port, or if this is essentially a national security play, then either the Ministry of Ports should be handling this, or the Ministry of Defense should be handling this. Those are the guys with the core competency. In this case, the authority which is overseeing the entire project is the Home Ministry. And this question comes back again: what does the Home Ministry know about transshipment ports? For that matter, what does ANIIDCO know about transshipment ports? ANIIDCO's biggest revenue stream so far is liquor distribution in the islands. Why has it been given a 81,000 crore project? Right? In the same vein, why is ANIIDCO overseeing logging when the forest department is there? Right? And some of these are then questions which are essentially political economy questions. And I was telling Pankaj this some time back that actually the wrong place to study the port project is Campbell Bay. This is a project which has to be studied not even in Port Blair, but actually in Mumbai and Delhi. That is where the answers for this thing lie. The haste, the opacity, the never-ending parade of absolutely stupid decisions. This is a Delhi story.
So, a question for both of you. There has been historical precedents in, especially in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, where careless policies have devastated lives of tribal communities such as the Great Andamanese and the Onges, who have lost their culture, contracted diseases, and even risk complete obliteration. How do you place this new project in the context of such historical violations?
I think it's you've kind of, I think the answer is embedded in the question, Divya. It's just a repetition. We have not learned anything. And I think here the scale of what is proposed in terms of the economic investment, in terms of the land requirement, this forest clearance, I mean, just to go back, 130 square kilometers of one patch of forest. I think it's one of the largest single clearances ever been done under the Ministry of Environment and Forests. So, what chance, like I mentioned earlier, will these people have? The Nicobaris are about 500-600 people who Rajshekhar, like he mentioned, they've been resettled from their original habitations. They want to go back to their lands. They are deeply worried about their culture and their lands. The Champagne are pretty much out of contact with the outside world. There are a few members, maybe, of some of the local and the tribal welfare people who might actually be in touch with them. But we know very little about these communities. We know very little about how they use the lands, what are their structures, what are their resource use. So just taking over 20% of that land and that forest, bringing in 300,000 people who will themselves need the resources. They're not going to stay in that small patch of land that is settled, created for them. They are going to move into the forest. There will be logging. What will happen to water? What will happen to disease? What will happen to waste, liquid waste, solid waste? Uh, where will the water come from for all of this? So, I mean, uh, this is a no-brainer in terms of it is going to be decimation of these communities. There's no chance that they are going to be able to survive, and there is enough evidence from, like you mentioned, from the Andaman's part, and already there it was a very long, slow process, relatively speaking. Here, it's almost like you're bludgeoning this place into something, and this is what these communities will have to respond to and deal with, and having no experience or no knowledge of actually what's going on. So, I don't think there's any chance that they're going to have any future, and it's going to probably, if any element of this comes through, it's going to be faster than what we have seen, uh, because it's just so big. The scale of this is unimaginable. As comparison, where I am in Bombay, the the Sanjay Gandhi National Park in Bombay, which is one of it's like the jewel in the crown of conservation, is about 100 odd square kilometers in area. And are we going to just sacrifice that for something of the kind that we're talking about here? And there are economic evaluations which always are not very attractive, or have their own problems. But for an ecosystem like this, in a city like this, we're talking of hundreds of thousands of crores worth of value that is generated from this little patch of land, and more than that land in the most pristine forest, in an area where uh, we don't know some of the species that might be there. Certainly, there are a large number of endemics. We've not spoken about the giant leatherback and the Galathea Bay being perhaps the most important nesting site of the giant leatherback in the entire northern Indian Ocean. These turtles, who nest in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, then swim as far as the coast of Africa and the coast of Australia. So this is all of it put together uh, is priceless, and and of course the indigenous communities who've been there for, I've been discussing, for thousands of years. There's no chance they're going to manage. Actually, there's absolutely no chance that they will manage.
So, to sort of talk about what's happening to, there's a long history of marginalization of the tribals. Um, but I sort of see this as three different stages which have played out, right? There was the whole colonial phase, wave one. Then there was the post independence phase when the state was very paternal, proportionately ignorant, and we had to keep contending with statements like, how can we leave the tribals in the forest? They have to be mainstreamed, right? And then the Adim Janjati Vikas Samiti, AAJBS, etc., were created, and they created their own brand of holy chaos. Okay, books like Madhushri's Land of the Naked People sort of describe that very well. What you're seeing now is different from these two phases. What you're now seeing is something which has actually played out in states like Chhattisgarh in the past, where there is this drive to build infrastructure projects and so on. But now the government has moved away not only from the islanders, but also from the provincial capitalists. Now, what you have is investors from other parts of the country. Okay, several of them from Gujarat, uh, coming in to invest in and pick up projects in not only Andaman and Nicobar, but also in Lakshadweep. Okay, so one narrative that you get in even in states like Andhra, when ports like Gangavaram and Krishnapatnam were acquired, was that outsiders are coming and taking over our economic assets. Now, similar voices are being heard here, that there's this third wave of colonialism going on where mainlander firms are going to come um, and basically extract the surpluses from here. The locals are not going to benefit all that much. And the thing is that when you are just coming in from outside, you have very little skin in the game. If you can make your profit in the, like I said, in the process of construction, you will make your profit then and you will get out. What is left behind is a very, very bedraggled local economy, right? Um, that is what happened with Tista 3, incidentally, where when the project went into financial trouble, little Sikkim came in and bought out the project from big global financial investors, right? We don't know what happens here, that you will build the project. Investors can sort of always sort of prevail upon the administration to sort of give them an exit, right? Um, I think this arithmetic of how the ecological costs fall, the social costs fall, and how the economic costs fall uh, in this third wave of um, what people keep calling settler colonialism hasn't really been understood.
Okay, my final question before we open this up for the audience. So the government has said that it will plant trees in Haryana to compensate for the millions of trees that are slated to be felled in Nicobar, and also that corals will be translocated. Can this actually work,
I think the simple
Pankaj?
answer is no. Simple answer is no. And I mean, again, in the latest issue, uh, Fragile Future, we have this absolutely beautiful, detailed article by Shankar Raman and Rohan from the NCF. I think it's a deep read. It's beautifully written. It's as much ecology as invoking ethics within the scientific community. It's about philosophy of so many things. So, and I think they're asking and they're raising and making the same point that this cannot simply be done for so many reasons. And there is, even at a logical level, uh, how can a landscape which is so specific, the singularity of that landscape, the coastline, the humidity, the rainfall, the temperature, the configuration of the forest. These are all very intricately linked and we don't even know it fully. So you might even assume that you build a forest, whether it's possible in Haryana at all, in the sense of, and that's another very interesting issue that requires to be looked into. So it is not just, so for 130 square kilometers in Great Nicobar, we now have 260 square kilometers of land in Haryana that has actually been declared as forest. Now, what lands are these? Whose lands are these? What was the use of these lands? So are these common lands? Are these community lands? Are they private ownership? They perhaps are already forest. What is the logic of this whole thing? What is going to be the impact in this particular landscape? Because now there's a safari park that's going to be created in this over some 10,000 acres, which a lot of local people, ecologists, old and retired forest officers have raised objections to. So not only can you not, you can't bring the Nicobar megaport and make it live in Haryana. It's impossible. So you're going to lose that. There's no way that that can be replaced in any case. And Great Nicobar is just so unique. You have creatures on this island that are not found anywhere else on the planet, leave alone even in the local landscape, leave alone in other parts of the world. So how is it going to be possible? The giant leatherback is of course not going to be able to come to Haryana to nest. That creature needs very specific configurations of the coast and the beach and sand, um, and the port will be constructed in that bay. That nesting site is gone. So how can it ever replace? How can we even think it will replace? Actually, I think it's going to cause a lot of problem in Haryana, which we have not studied enough. There was a report a few months ago where actually almost in the same month, where some lands in this swap were notified as forest in Haryana, parts of that land were handed over for mining by the Haryana Mining Department. It's a matter of record. So what is going to remain there and what's going to happen here? I think both places we are creating actually a disaster. It's a double disaster. It's a double-edged sword that's going to cut both ways. And we have some ecologists on this discussion today, and they will tell you that it's an impossible thing to even think of. And corals, you can't do that. It's simply not possible.
All right. So let me just read out some of the comments that we've been getting in. Okay, one by Rohan Murray seems to be a little contrarian. So it says, seems to be going the Narmada Bachao way without understanding the benefits. Building the narrative has commenced. So somebody obviously sees some potential in the development of these islands.
No, I think, I mean, I would really urge the gentleman to read what has been written, to look at the body of evidence that is there. Uh, we are not speaking, like we got up in the morning and this is 5 years of work. We've been looking at amongst ourselves at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents, with thousands of papers. There's a lot of evidence being put together. We are looking at the benefits. Rashikar has done this very detailed account of that. So, the question is, what is the basis of the of what is the benefit that is being proposed? What is the benefit that is being seen? What is that narrative? Uh, and all we have is to be able to we can build a narrative to ask those questions, and all that we're doing is asking those questions. So, uh, what benefits are sought to be gained? Um, can there be a proper justification if there are any benefits at all? At what cost they will come? Uh, I just make this one point again. 40,000 crores in a port project in that landscape that saw 15 feet of submergence. If you look at a picture of the lighthouse at Indira Point, it stands in the ocean. Imagine another port project, another earthquake. There have been earthquakes of the range of 8 on the Richter scale in that landscape. Just one tilt of the land, it's a regular occurrence in that space. So, what benefits are we talking about? Benefits to whom? And at what cost? At the singularity of the landscape, the species, human cultures. So, I would really urge the gentleman to look at what is being said, whose narrative has he already bought into.
There are a couple of comments here about Thailand. Okay, there is Manavalan F. Thailand is fully developed, and in our lifetime, no way we will be anywhere near to giving them competition. Man, you need to read about Thailand. Um, Thailand is run by a king, and like books like A Kingdom in Crisis will tell you, and other reports will tell you, um, if you were to criticize the king, the Lese Majeste Act will apply to you and you'll be in jail. One. More pertinently, in this case, um, the people who are rich in Thailand are about 20 families which are close to the king. Okay. Do you think it's a coincidence that Bangkok, the central Bangkok, is so developed and the rest of the island has endemic sex tourism, where the women from uh, you know rural parts of the state end up getting into sex work? It's one of the most unequal societies in this world right now. And what you're talking about and what we are talking about here is the same business model where a handful of firms grab large government contracts, make a lot of money, and the rest of the population is pushed into poverty, A, and B, you're not allowed to complain, right? Reporting is discouraged, A. B, uh, there is any amount of social media garbage going around saying that these are narratives. It might be a narrative, but it's the narrative which has been built after talking to the people of those islands. Okay, it is their voice. What the media does is amplify the voice of those people who are on the ground. Okay, please go read on Thailand. A Kingdom in Crisis is the book. Or just Google and read up a little more on the Lese Majesty Act.
Okay, so there are a few comments about the rights of tribals. So, what are the rights that can be leveraged in order to, like take another look at this proposal? And then, so they say. Uh, there's one person who says, so Natasha Rego, she says, do the Champagnes know that this is coming? And do we know what they think about it? And Pankaj, I actually wanted to ask you because in one of your lectures, you'd spoken about how the Champagnes were first, um, okay with this project coming up, and then they became vehement opposers of the project. So, what was it that changed their stance? And is there some civil society organization that is informing them about the repercussions of this project?
So there's a small correction. What you just mentioned was about the Great Nicobaris and not the Shompen. So the Great Nicobaris are also one of the indigenous communities there, as we've been discussing. They are the ones who were primarily coastal dwellers and were very badly impacted when the tsunami came, and so they were the ones who were then shifted to Campbell Bay and to these makeshift settlements that also Rajshekhar spoke about, and they are the ones who've been wanting to go back. And initially, I mean, going through this process of the EIA and all that, through some process that was followed, they did kind of accept and said it was okay under some kind of, I think, understanding that they would have a chance to go back and to their land. They want to go back. And I think as they learned more about the project in consultation, most likely with the administration, getting to know, because see, they are not inaccessible in the way, say, the Shompen are in terms of language and even otherwise. So uh, they do have a sense of what is going on, perhaps not to the extent that we think or we know, but when they realized and they saw the details of the project, I think it became very clear to them that this possibility of then going back to their lands is not going to be there anymore, which is very quickly, subsequent to the clearance that were granted. They wrote a very detailed letter, and many of the what I know the captains of the community have signed this letter saying that we were not given full information. We want to go back. Uh, and I think that is, but the response of the administration and the government has been that, oh, well, we followed due process and you gave us permissions and we can't go back. And I think there is this question of being just too hyper technical and too hyper bureaucratic, because if the community and the respected and the appropriate representatives are saying that yes, we may have said yes, but now we have new information, we have new understanding, and it is not acceptable, then just going by the process of getting that signature on a particular piece of paper in a contest like this, I think we need to be far more flexible and open to account for that. So that is where the Great Nicobar, the Nicobarese community is concerned. They have made it quite clear that they are not happy. There is a letter from them on record, uh, and we all of us know about it. It is there in the book that we did with Frontline, which is the Great Nicobar Betrayal. Uh, there is the other question of the Champagne. Uh, there's been very limited uh, engagement with them. There is a bunch of researchers, Dr. Vishwajit Pandya, Manish Chandi, and others, who a few years ago were in conversation as part of a process that was initiated. Uh, and I think they are on record to say that we don't want the outside world to disturb us. To the extent that we know, they don't want to be. And I'm not the best person to talk about that because I've not worked with them. I don't know. But I think they probably don't have a sense of what is being proposed and what is being done in their lands. And we don't know how they are going to be responding to this. So, in that forest rights application that I was speaking to you about, the Tribal Welfare Department is a representative of the Champagne giving permission on their behalf, which is a violation of the FRA. They can't do that. The law says that the indigenous people, the tribal communities, have to be part of that process. So it's very unlikely that they know the full scale, and that is partly the problem with or the challenge in these contexts. That these are very different universes and worldviews that come clashing, and of course, the dominant one is going to steamroll the other one. That's what I would say. Yeah.
There is also a particular amount of sophistry and misleading statements in all this, right? So the AI document or one of these documents says that the Champagne will not be affected by the project because they don't live in this area where the project is going to come up. But the truth is that there is one, the Galathea River is the largest river on the island. It empties into the Galathea Bay. If I'm a hunter gatherer, chances are I will have some use for the delta system of the biggest river on my island. A. B. There is one population of Champagne who actually live very, very close to Galathea Bay on the west bank. This statement, however, has just been made very boldly in the government impact assessment report, saying that no, Champagne are not affected. They are. And like Manish Chandni was telling me that even if you were to displace them, they will go into the territories of other Champagne and there will be conflict, right? As it is, um, even with the Nicobaris, there is such hesitation, I think, in asking the administration for their rights. The Champagne don't even understand. Uh, it's like ecological naivete. I mean, they have no idea about all of these rules and legal systems and rights and whatever we have. They are not in a position to comprehend this at all. They will just be sort of absolutely sort of sideswiped by this.
And I mean, just there are comments. Yeah, and comments by people who know more about, like Manish and others who worked who know. So I think that's also adding to the layers of information and complexity and to understand. In one of the earlier project documents, when some of us raised these concerns of the impact of the people who will be brought in to the islands and the impact on the indigenous communities like the Champagne, one of the responses was that, oh, we will put a barbed wire fence so that the two communities can be separated and they'll never have a chance to kind of interact. So this is the level of expertise, and this is the level of how pathetic is that kind of a thinking even. That is not going to be possible at all. But we even think that you can separate communities like this and this works. And now they're talking of a geo fencing, of some kind of technology fencing, which is completely bizarre, completely non-implementable, and it means nothing. It's just one more round of ticking of those boxes. So we are in for a huge challenge going ahead.
And the variable here is that one reason why, look, I've been going to the Andamans every 10 years, okay, by accident, but it is one of the most it's one of the parts of India where the administration runs riot purely because there is such little oversight. There's very little independent media, there's very little civil society, distance is a factor. There is no political executive at all. And so, in an island like Great Nicobar, where access is curtailed, distance is great, uh, there will be very little independent verification of on whether the administration is implementing any of these things that they're talking about right now. Right? Compounding those problems, the body in charge of implementing all this is a tiny little body which has cut its spurs distributing alcohol, not infrastructure projects. Right? Call me a cynic, but I think the odds are kind of tilting against this one, being Singapore of the future. But the larger point that I want to make without getting snide is that exactly who is there in this ecosystem who is going to verify whether any of these deliverables are indeed being delivered. I don't see who. I mean, there's no is there any room for some an independent evaluator to go in here? Do we have to just take the administration at face value and good faith? Why should we do that?
Okay, so Ravi Chellam says that the case is now being heard by the Calcutta High Court. So, do we have any updates on the case? And
Yeah, I can quickly. It's been very recent. There have been two petitions in the Calcutta High Court. Uh, One is on this FRA matter that I have been talking about on the Forest Rights Act, which in the before the Chief Justice of the Calcutta High Court, he has admitted the petition. This was about a month and a half ago, and this is where all these what I was speaking about, how the the procedures seem to have been followed, but actually they are not being followed because it's very central. The very fact that the clearance has been given by the constitution of certain committees that have been constituted incorrectly. So there is a specific violation, a fundamental violation of how that is done. And of course, like I said, 15 years you did nothing, and suddenly within 22 days you finish an entire process. So there has been the first step, of course, is the admission of that happened. And more recently, it's a slightly complicated matter of what's known as a eco-sensitive zone around a protected area. And I think there's one of the things in the comments, and we didn't speak about it, is that the a large part of the Great Nicobar Island is a UNESCO biosphere reserve. There are two national parks which attest to the importance from an ecological perspective. Galathea Bay, where the port is coming up, was or is or was a wildlife sanctuary for turtle nesting, and this was explicitly denotified even before the project proposal came into the public domain, and said explicitly that if we don't denotify this sanctuary, we can't build the port over here. So the changes were not made for any ecological reason; they were made for purely for allowing the port to come up. So these national parks also have, under the Wildlife Protection Act, what's known as the eco-sensitive zone. And again, suddenly one day, these in certain parts where the project land is to come up, uh, it was declared as a 0 kilometer eco-sensitive zone, even though those areas are as rich in terms of forest and biodiversity as the national park itself. So again, there's a very serious violation of the provisions under which the ESZ is supposed to be notified or not notified, and that is the other matter that has come up. And in both the cases, they have been admitted. And in a recent hearing, as typically happens, the administration has been questioning locus standi, but the going beyond and kind of undercutting the substantive matters of what is really at stake. But the court has admitted the petition, has acknowledged the locus standi of the petitioner, and also made certain observations to say that, okay, this is important and it has to be considered. So this is the first round. We'll see what happens in terms of submission. Actually, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, in their counter affidavit to the has said that, we are not part of this. Please take us out of this petition. We don't want to be a respondent. So they've said something in terms of what the process should be, and they have basically said we want out. So that's really very strange, actually, because how can they want out? This is the most vulnerable tribal community, right under their should be their primary responsibility. So we'll see how that goes. But it's important that these matters have come up, and hopefully there will be an acknowledgement uh, of all that's happening. Yeah.
So just to add to what Pankaj is saying, I spoke to a forester in the islands, okay, and he said that they were told to basically relocate the turtle sanctuary to the west coast of Great Nicobar. And this guy protested, saying that animals decide where to nest. Just because you sort of shift the administrative location of a sanctuary doesn't mean that the turtles are going to start turning left at Galathea Bay and sailing north again, right? But this is what is happening. This is, again, one more epitome of stripping away actual protections and replacing them with paper protections, or protections only on paper. Um, and it makes you think, what is the point in having a biosphere reserve or a wildlife sanctuary if it can be denotified at will, right? I mean, presumably some areas are inviolate. It's like there was in 2012 Economic Times, TK Arun had a outstanding editorial around Vedanta and Niyamgiri. There was all this pressure to mine on Niyam Raja, and he had written a editorial, and this is the Economic Times, for God's sake, saying that India can very well progress, leaving some deposits of bauxite untouched. It's not important enough for the country, right? And I think that is what we have lost sight of. A country of this size has multiple economic engines. You don't One port is not a make or break decision for you in that sense, right? I think the political economy here is different. What the political economy is, what we have to understand, that what is this urgency, what is this secrecy, who gains from this combination of urgency and secrecy, and why and how.
So I see a lot of outrage in the comments, people calling the this project criminal and insensitive, and then Himanshu Ardhawatia says thanks for this brilliant work. However, a large population is either ignorant or there is general apathy. Perhaps it is because of outreach and language. Unfortunately, it could be because most of the work has been written about in English. But that's not true because Pankaj, your work has been translated into uh, regional languages as well.
So, if I might, responding to that, well, I think it's partly what he's saying is true, uh, but I just want to also just take this opportunity to share with our audience the book that Frontline has done called The Great Nicobar Betrayal. It's a collection of an earlier set of articles which has reached out tremendously. It gives a lot of information. Frontline did this special issue in which the recent issue, which Raj Shekhar, myself, and others have written. So that effort is being made to reach out. Certain aspects of the media have responded. The Hindu group, Frontline, other news outlets. So in that sense, you're right. But we are trying to do that. Uh, there is a Bengali translation of the Great Nicobar Betrayal that's in the works. There's a team in Calcutta that is hard at work on it. Maybe by the end of this month, we will have a translation out. But this really, I might just take this moment to make an appeal that if there are researchers, if there are journalists, uh, if you want to translate stories, I absolutely agree. We need to reach out into different languages to larger number of people. If you do your own journalism in different languages, the stories that we have done, and there are many, they have been evaluated. I mean, they can be translated. They should be translated. Uh, and this is an ongoing job. We constantly are getting new information. We also put together a very substantial resource, a timeline, which I can share with you all if you would like to access the information then work with it. So I think it's an important point. And within what we've been managing to do, yeah, more needs to be done. And yes, Rajshekhar is desperately wants to say something, but yes, Rajshekhar, all yours.
Desperately, but I want to say something. I think the thing to remember is that Great Nicobar is just one project coming up on the archipelago. All right. There are also plans to build a deep water port in Diglipur in North Andaman. There is a plan to build a huge tourist campus on Hut Bay, Little Andaman. Um, there was some plan of trying to do a ship to ship transfer of cargo like coal just off the Jarava Tribal Reserve. Okay. And so we are now sort of entering, or rather, let me rephrase, the islands are entering a time where a sort of a resource grab is underway. Okay, the economics of it, who gains from it, whether the locals benefit from it, those are questions that we have to pay attention to. There are multiple large projects coming. I mean, Great Nicobar is just the first one to get started.
Rajshekar just pointed me to one comment. Uh, One second, I'm just going to access it. So, Jayashri Mazumdar says, I lived with Nicobaris in Little Nicobar, a restricted island, during my doctoral research days. They do not want anything modern. They are happy in their way of life. And asked, oh God, when I asked if they would be interested in change, their reply was that we only want basics like roads, hospitals, schools, and telephone communication. So this is somebody who's actually uh, lived with the Nicobaris, and this is their assessment of their situation.
No, thank you very much, Divya. Thanks to Frontline, Rajshekar, and I just feel there's more work to be done, and hopefully we can continue with that. I mean, there's so much more that can be written and researched. There are huge gaps. There are huge gaps that need to be looked at. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. And I think this video will go up online. Many people were asking, so a edited version will go up, and I think it can then be shared for a larger outreach.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to us and for your time.
Thanks so much for joining us, Pankaj and Rajshekar.